Life has a way of testing us in the most unforgiving ways. And for me, IMO, that test came when I was just 29 years old. My world shattered on a cold winter night when my husband was killed in a horrific car accident. He was not just my partner, but also the father of our two precious daughters, Haruka, who was only 5 at the time, and Yuki, barely 2. The news hit me like an avalanche, burying every dream we had built together under the weight of despair. Suddenly, I found myself alone in Tokyo, a city as unforgiving as it is vast, with no one to lean on except my own trembling resolve. Determined to provide for my girls, I opened a small roadside restaurant in Asakusa. It wasn't much, a modest diner serving simple meals, but it was all I had, or so I thought. One fateful evening, disaster struck again. A short circuit caused a fire that ravaged the entire place. Everything I had worked so hard to build turned to ashes before my eyes. I felt as though the universe itself conspired against me. But giving up was never an option. With tears streaming down my face, I borrowed money from friends and strangers alike, working day and night to rebuild what had been lost. Those early days were a blur of exhaustion and desperation. The sacrifices I made during those years are etched into my soul forever. There were mornings when I skipped meals so my daughters could eat, pretending I wasn't hungry while my stomach gnawed at itself. Once I collapsed from sheer fatigue while preparing dinner, hitting the floor with a thud that echoed through the empty kitchen. Yet somehow I forced myself back onto my feet, determined to feed my children no matter the cost. But perhaps the cruelest blow came when a customer, a man I trusted, cheated me out of payment after weeks of service. Desperate to pay my staff, I scoured the streets of Tokyo begging for loans and swallowing my pride. That period of darkness nearly broke me. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if life would ever show mercy. But even then, something deep inside refused to surrender. Each hardship became another brick in the foundation of resilience I was unknowingly building. Little did I know these trials would shape not only my future, but also the legacy I would leave behind. At the age of 68, after closing her small restaurant in Asakusa, a place that had been both her livelihood and her sanctuary for 34 years, IMO thought she was finally ready to embrace a quieter, simpler life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just months into her retirement, a sharp, searing pain shot through her lower back, leaving her unable to stand or walk without assistance. The diagnosis came as a devastating blow, a severe herniated disc. Her doctor's words echoed in her mind like an ominous prophecy. You need complete rest. Avoid any physical strain if you want to recover. For most people, such news would have been daunting enough, but for IMO, it felt like the universe was conspiring against her once again. She lay on the stiff hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by fear. What terrified her more than the pain itself was the prospect of becoming dependent on others, especially her daughters, Haruka and Yuki. After spending decades sacrificing everything for them, the last thing she wanted was to burden them now. Yet here she was, facing the very reality she dreaded most, the possibility of being helpless. Her daughters visited her daily, their faces etched with worry. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Haruka gently broached the subject they had been avoiding. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "why don't you come live with me? We can take care of you. You shouldn't be alone during this time." Yuki quickly chimed in, her enthusiasm masking the concern in her eyes. Yes, Mom. The kids miss having you around, and we'd love to have you stay with us. IMO listened silently, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew they meant well, but the thought of moving in with either of them filled her with dread. It wasn't just about losing her independence. It was about something deeper. She feared becoming a shadow in their lives, someone who needed constant attention yet offered little in return. More than anything, she feared losing herself entirely. Summoning every ounce of strength, IMO looked at her daughters, her voice quivering but resolute. I, I don't want to become a burden to you, she said, each word heavy with emotion. Please let me live my own way. Tears welled up in Haruka's and Yuki's eyes, spilling down their cheeks. They tried to protest, but IMO shook her head firmly. This is not rejection, she continued, her tone softening. It's love. True love means giving each other space to grow, even when it's hard. The room fell silent except for the sound of muffled sobs. For a moment, it felt as though time stood still. Haruka reached out and held her mother's hand, her grip tight yet tender. We just want you to be happy, Mom, she whispered. IMO smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And I am happiest when I know I'm not weighing anyone down, she replied. But the road ahead was far from easy. In the weeks that followed, IMO faced one challenge after another. Simple tasks like getting out of bed or reaching for a glass of water became Herculean feats. There were nights when the pain kept her awake, her body aching with every movement. On particularly bad days, doubt crept into her mind. Was she foolish to refuse her daughter's help? Could she truly regain her strength on her own? Yet amidst the darkness, a spark of determination burned within her. Slowly, painstakingly, she began taking small steps toward a recovery. Each morning she whispered to herself, "Today I will try again." With sheer willpower, she forced herself to sit up, then stand, and eventually take a few wobbly steps around the house. Every tiny victory felt monumental, fueling her resolve to keep going. One day while practicing yoga, a practice she had recently discovered, she realized something profound. Her health wasn't just her responsibility, it was her greatest asset. If I don't take care of myself, she thought, who will? This epiphany ignited a fire within her, transforming her perspective on aging and self-care. For the first time in years, she began to see herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of her own destiny. Though her journey was far from over, IMO's unwavering spirit inspired those around her, including her daughters, who began to understand the depth of her courage. Little did they know this was only the beginning of a transformation that would redefine what it meant to live fully, even in the twilight years of life. The first treasure, health, a journey of resilience and triumph. When IMO first decided to take control over health, she had no idea how grueling the journey would be. Her body, worn down by decades of relentless work in the restaurant, felt like an old machine on the verge of collapse. Every step forward seemed to demand more strength than she thought she possessed. Yet, despite the odds stacked against her, she refused to surrender. Her introduction to yoga began with a simple invitation from a kind elderly woman she met at the park. "Would you like to join our yoga club?" the woman asked, her voice warm and inviting. Though hesitant, IMO nodded, unaware that this decision would become the cornerstone of her transformation. The first few weeks were nothing short of torturous. Her muscles, stiff and unyielding, protested every stretch. One particularly brutal session left her writhing on the mat as a sudden muscle cramp seized her leg. She fell forward, her already aching back slamming into the ground. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from the pain, but from the overwhelming frustration of feeling so powerless. For a moment, she questioned whether she was too old, too broken, to ever recover. But IMO's spirit was indomitable. Even on the coldest winter mornings when frost blanketed the streets of Tokyo, she forced herself out of bed and onto her daily walk. One fateful morning, her foot slipped on an icy patch, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. Her ankle throbbed painfully, and each step afterward felt like walking on shards of glass. Yet, with gritted teeth, she pushed through the agony, refusing to let the setback define her. "If I stop now," she whispered to herself, "I'll never get back up." 6 months later, something miraculous happened. As she stood in front of her mirror one morning, she realized she no longer needed the cane that had been her constant companion. Slowly, tentatively, she straightened her spine, feeling the weight of years of exhaustion lift off her shoulders. In that moment, tears streamed down her face, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unbridled joy. It was as though she had conquered not just her physical ailments, but also the doubts that had plagued her mind. She had proven to herself that resilience could overcome even the most daunting challenges. This newfound vitality became the foundation for everything else in her life. Through yoga, she discovered not only physical strength, but also a profound sense of self-worth. "My health isn't someone else's responsibility," she declared during one class. "It's my greatest asset. Taking care of myself is true freedom." These words resonated deeply with those around her, including her daughters, who began to see their mother in a new light, a woman who was reclaiming her life with fierce determination. The second treasure: relationships, building bridges of understanding. While her physical recovery was a triumph, IMO knew that true fulfillment required meaningful connections. Her next step toward happiness came unexpectedly when she joined a volunteer group planting flowers in her neighborhood park. At first, the task seemed mundane, pulling weeds, preparing soil, but it quickly evolved into something far more significant. One day, while teaching an 8-year-old boy how to dig without damaging the roots of delicate plants, disaster struck. The boy accidentally severed the stem of a rare flower, one that the entire team had nurtured for months. His face crumpled with guilt, and he looked up at IMO, expecting anger. Instead, she knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry," she said gently. "Mistakes happen. What matters is that we learn from them." Though her words comforted the boy inside, IMO felt a pang of regret. That flower had symbolized hope for the community, and its loss stung deeply. Yet in that moment, she understood the value of patience and forgiveness. Sometimes letting go of perfection allows room for growth, not just in others, but within ourselves. However, not all interactions were so tender. Early on, a fellow volunteer harshly criticized IMO for failing to complete her assigned task on time. The comment cut deep, leaving her questioning whether she truly belonged in the group. But instead of retreating, IMO chose to confront the issue head-on. She approached the woman with humility, apologizing sincerely and promising to do better. Over time, their relationship improved, blossoming into mutual respect and camaraderie. This experience taught IMO that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a bridge to deeper connections. Through these relationships, IMO found solace in companionship. Whether laughing with younger volunteers or sharing stories with older ones, She realized that age was irrelevant when hearts connected authentically. Her friendships became a lifeline, reminding her that loneliness wasn't inevitable in old age. It was a choice she had the power to change. The third treasure, passion, a symphony of self-discovery. Of all the treasures IMO uncovered, none was more transformative than her passion for music. When she announced her decision to take piano lessons at the age of 68, her daughters were stunned. "Are you serious, Mom?" they asked, their skepticism evident. After all, learning such a complex skill at her age seemed almost impossible. But IMO wasn't deterred. She remembered the dream she had buried long ago, a dream of playing the melodies that had once brought her comfort. Now, with time on her side, she vowed to bring it to life. The journey was anything but easy. During her first lesson, her fingers stumbled clumsily over the keys, producing discordant notes that made her wince. Worse still, some younger students openly mocked her, whispering snide remarks about her age and lack of talent. One teacher even remarked bluntly, "You're too old to start something like this." Those words pierced her heart, and for a fleeting moment, she considered giving up. But then she reminded herself why she had started, to honor the parts of herself she had neglected for so long. Day after day, week after week, IMO practiced tirelessly. Her fingers, once stiff and uncoordinated, gradually gained agility. Each small improvement filled her with renewed hope. 6 months later, she received an invitation to perform at a local nursing home. Standing before an audience for the first time in her life, her heart raced with apprehension. But as her hands touched the keys, something magical happened. The melody flowed effortlessly, carrying with it the emotions she had poured into every practice session. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. Tears blurred her vision as she bowed, overwhelmed by the realization that she had achieved what once seemed impossible. For IMO, the piano became more than an instrument. It became a vessel for self-expression and healing. Through music, she rediscovered her identity, proving that age was merely a number. Her daughters watched in awe as their mother transformed before their eyes, no longer the weary woman who had sacrificed everything for them, but a vibrant individual living fully and freely. The news of Aiko's death struck IMO like a thunderclap, shaking her to the core. Her dearest friend, who had been by her side through decades of laughter and hardship, was found lifeless in her home, alone, forgotten, and untouched by human warmth for an entire week. It wasn't just grief that overwhelmed IMO, it was terror. That night, she sat motionless at her kitchen table, clutching a faded photograph of the two of them. Her hands trembled as tears blurred the image of happier times. "Could this be my fate too?" she whispered aloud into the suffocating silence. The question echoed in her mind, relentless and haunting. For hours, IMO wrestled with dark thoughts. She imagined herself lying unseen, unmissed, until days turned into weeks. What if her daughters were too busy with their own lives to notice? What if independence, a value she cherished, became isolation instead? These fears gnawed at her heart, leaving her breathless. Yet, amidst the despair, something within her stirred. Eco's tragic end served as both a warning and a wake-up call. If there was one thing IMO had learned from her struggles, it was resilience. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape her future. By dawn, determination replaced dread. Sitting upright, IMO vowed never to let herself fade into oblivion. From that moment on, she committed to living boldly, not just for others, but for herself. She would nurture friendships, pursue passions, and create a life so vibrant that loneliness wouldn't dare creep near. This realization ignited a fire within her, a fierce resolve to embrace every day fully, without fear or hesitation. Though the memory of Aiko weighed heavily, it became the catalyst for IMO's transformation. She understood now more than ever. True independence wasn't about cutting ties. It was about staying connected while remaining self-reliant. And with that clarity came peace. The death of Aiko was a turning point in IMO's life, but it wasn't just the loss that shook her. It was the haunting realization of how easily loneliness could consume someone. Before Aiko passed away, she had called IMO late one evening, her voice trembling with despair. "I feel so alone," Aiko had confessed between sobs. At the time, IMO was juggling the demands of raising two young daughters while keeping her struggling restaurant afloat. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she listened distractedly, offering only vague reassurances before ending the call prematurely. It wasn't until weeks later, when Aiko's body was discovered untouched in her home days after her passing, that IMO fully grasped the weight of what she had ignored. The guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, a constant reminder of how much she had failed to be there for her closest friend. At Aiko's funeral, IMO stood frozen before the casket, staring at the still face of the woman who had once shared laughter and tears with her. Memories flooded back, their countless conversations over cups of tea, the quiet moments of understanding. And now this silence. Her chest tightened as she thought about the finality of Aiko's solitude, a fate that seemed almost unbearable to comprehend. Slowly, she reached out to touch the cold wood of the coffin, her hands gripping its edge, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away forever. Through clenched teeth, she whispered fiercely to herself, "I will never let this happen to me." She vowed silently but resolutely, "I'll live for myself. I'll live well." That day marked the beginning of an internal revolution within IMO. As she walked away from the cemetery, her mind churned with thoughts of regret and determination. She couldn't undo the past or bring Aiko back, but she could honor her memory by ensuring no one else, including herself, would suffer the same fate. For years, IMO had poured every ounce of energy into caring for others, her children, her family, even strangers at her restaurant. But in doing so, she had neglected the most important person, herself. Now, standing at the precipice of change, she resolved to reclaim her identity, to rediscover the joy and purpose that life still offered beyond sacrifice. Her journey towards self-reliance began tentatively, fueled by both fear and resolve. Every small step felt monumental, a phone call to an old acquaintance, signing up for yoga classes, or simply sitting quietly in reflection without feeling guilty for taking time for herself. Yet beneath these actions lay a deeper transformation, a newfound awareness of her own worth. The shadow of Aiko's death loomed large, but instead of paralyzing her, it propelled her forward. Each decision became an act of defiance against the specter of loneliness, a declaration that she deserved better than to fade into obscurity. In those early days, guilt still lingered like a storm cloud overhead. But as IMO embraced her independence, she found solace in knowing that Aiko's tragic end would not define her own path. Instead, it would serve as a catalyst for growth, a reminder that true fulfillment comes not from living solely for others, but from nurturing oneself first. IMO's journey of rediscovery reached a pivotal moment when her piano performances began to transcend mere notes and melodies. transforming into acts of profound connection and healing. One unforgettable day, she performed at a nursing home, her fingers dancing across the keys with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. As the final note lingered in the air, an elderly man sitting near the front row broke down in tears. His sightless eyes glistened with emotion as he whispered hoarsely, "For the first time in years, I feel like life is still worth living." The weight of his words struck EMO like a thunderbolt. She realized then that music wasn't just about self-expression. It was a lifeline, a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. That encounter became a turning point, solidifying her belief in the power of sharing joy and purpose through small, intentional acts. However, it wasn't always smooth sailing. On another occasion, during an outdoor performance in the heart of Tokyo, the skies darkened ominously mid-performance. Within moments, rain poured down in torrents, soaking everything in its path. The audience scrambled for cover, but IMO remained seated at the piano, her hands poised above the keys. Her bandmates hesitated, unsure whether they should continue. Sensing their uncertainty, IMO turned to them with a determined smile. "The rain can't stop us," she declared firmly. "It's just water. What matters is the light we create together." With that, she launched into a soul-stirring melody, each note resonating through the stormy air. As the music swelled, something extraordinary happened. Members of the audience, initially retreating for shelter, slowly returned, standing under umbrellas or braving the rain without complaint. Their faces reflected awe and admiration, their spirits lifted by the sheer audacity of IMO's act. When the final chord faded, the crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. A young woman approached IMO afterward, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "You reminded us that even in the hardest storms, there's beauty and strength." These experiences reinforced IMO's understanding of the ripple effect kindness and artistry could have on others. Each performance became more than entertainment. It was a reminder that no matter how bleak circumstances seemed, there was always room for light, for connection, and for renewal. Through these moments, IMO found deeper meaning in her own life, realizing that giving back wasn't just about fulfilling societal expectations. It was about creating spaces where people felt seen, heard, and valued. Her newfound role as a source of inspiration didn't go unnoticed by her daughters either. Haruka often marveled at how her mother's music had touched so many lives, while Yuki expressed pride in seeing IMO defy societal norms about aging. For IMO, however, the greatest reward lay not in recognition, but in knowing she was planting seeds of hope wherever she went. Every tear shed, every smile shared, became proof that happiness wasn't confined to personal achievements. It blossomed when shared with others. The darkest chapter in IMO's life came not from her own struggles, but from the pain of witnessing her youngest daughter, Yuki, unravel under the weight of despair. After deciding to end her marriage, Yuki fell into a deep depression, her spirit crushed by feelings of failure and hopelessness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Yuki collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. "I can't take it anymore," she sobbed, her voice trembling with anguish. "Mom, I want to disappear." The rawness of her pain was unbearable for EMO to witness. It felt like a dagger piercing straight through her heart. For nights on end, IMO stayed awake, sitting vigilantly beside Yuki, terrified that her daughter might act on her darkest thoughts. She barely slept, her mind racing with fear and helplessness. Yet, despite her exhaustion, IMO refused to let despair consume them both. Drawing on decades of resilience, she knew this was a moment where strength, not words, would make all the difference. One fateful afternoon, as twilight settled over their home, IMO finally broke the silence. Sitting beside Yuki, who sat slumped on the couch, eyes hollow and distant, IMO began recounting her own journey, the sacrifices, the hardships, and the moments when life seemed too cruel to bear. "When your father passed away," she said softly, her voice steady yet filled with emotion, "I thought my world had ended. Raising you and Haruka alone felt impossible at times. There were days when I wanted to give up, nights when I cried myself to sleep, but I didn't stop moving forward, one step at a time." Her gaze locked onto Yuki's tear-streaked face, unwavering and full of love. "Life will test us in ways we never expect," she continued, her tone firm yet gentle. "But no matter how hard it gets, we must find the courage to keep going. You are stronger than you think, Yuki. This storm may feel endless now, but trust me, it will pass." Yuki listened intently, her breath hitching as waves of emotion washed over her. For the first time in weeks, she saw a glimmer of hope, a reflection of her mother's unyielding spirit. That conversation became a turning point. Inspired by IMO's example, Yuki began seeking professional counseling, determined to rebuild her confidence and independence. Slowly but surely, she emerged from the shadows of despair, rediscovering her purpose and joy. Through this ordeal, IMO realized something profound. True happiness lies in striking a balance between caring for oneself and sharing that strength with others. Her ability to endure stemmed not only from years of self-care, but also from the meaningful connections she nurtured along the way. By living authentically and embracing her own resilience, she became a beacon of hope, not just for herself, but for those around her.